very special to me because, like you all, I'm from a very small island. That tiny dot over there is quite rain. So we are like Puerto Rico, we're far from the mainland. The mainland is France for us, right? So the mainland is right here. So you can see that's 12 hours of flying to get there. But like you all, we do have extreme weather conditions sometimes. We call them cyclones, not hurricanes, but it's the same. And I remember when I was little, we will have cyclones and we will lose power for 2, 3, 4 days. And we were cut off from the whole world, right? There is the whole island we not have. Well, recently, we don't lose power for as long, maybe half a day or overnight, but that's it. And the reason is because we are using renewable resources that we have on the island to produce electricity. So hydroelectricity, so water, and also the bagasse from sugarcane as another source. So it makes us a little bit more resilient and we can recover faster from an emergency situation. So when I were in the US, we've been there for a while. So in the US, the mainland, they have different sources of energy, right? They have coal, they have petroleum, they have natural gas. But here, which is showing energy consumption in the US over time, right? Starting 1776, all the way to 2021. So the blue part, you can see that's coal, that's natural gas, petroleum. But you can see at 50 years the green one starts to increase, right? You start seeing that the US is starting losing a lot of energy. And these are more renewable energies. So coming from wind, from water, hydroelectricity, coal, petroleum, and natural gas are the primary ones. Change, and that is exciting to see that change. And actually, you know, the islands like Fiji change. Islands are going out the most impacted by climate change, right? And so they are leading that effort to go from petroleum or coal to natural resources for energy. And they bring these solutions and through investments and new knowledge that they are generating, it's creating, like you mentioned, a new opportunity for an economic development. Right? So it's a new income from the community. So when we think about renewable energy solutions, there is biomass, there is geothermal, wind, hydroelectricity, and solar, right? And if they are working well, then you have a very efficient energy system, right? And that can reduce what I was saying earlier, the shorter the recovery time after an emergency situation. Long-term economic damages from a climate crisis. So I'm going to talk about biomass today and how we can make energy from them. What is biomass? So it depends where you live. It depends what you have there. For in the southeast, so where we are from, we have a lot of forests. So the biomass. bioenergy production. Here in Puerto Rico, there are a few pictures here. Salvation is one of them, for example. So these are some of the biomass that we have received for the projects that we are analyzing. And the idea is to convert this biomass into energy. And I'm not going to talk about this here because Dr. Abdul will be talking about the conversion aspect. But what I want to point out is the end there is the products. We can make heat and power and fuel, so we can make, for example, sustainable aviation fuel, and this is a big deal for all the aviation industries. We want to be more sustainable. So these are when we are not in non-emergency situations, but it's still relevant to what we're trying to do. And we can make co-products. And Dr. Chang mentioned biochar is one of the co-products that you can make. And it's important to think about that in the sense you want to utilize all the biomass, right? So you don't want just to use 1/3 or 50% of the biomass. So we want to, everything is within the peak. That's what they say in Tennessee. So we use everything, we don't waste. And so converting biomass into energy is something that we've been doing that for a long time, but there are different ways to do it and more efficient way to do it, again, to minimize loss. And to do that, there are a few things we need to think about. It's what we call the attributes of efficient biomass. What is a good biomass? So a biomass that will be converted to feedstock for what we do. Of course, you have to have the biomass, the quantity is important, but I think that's not the problem here. Other things are important. Specifically, a good biomass will have high energy content, high carbon content, low ash, and low moisture. So these are the attributes that we really want to focus on when we started looking at the biomass that is available and which one can we use, should we use for a specific technologies. So example of when we're looking at the energy content in the biomass. So the first one here that you see, the bar here, the black one, it's coal. That's going to be our reference, but we should not be really as coal. Yes, it has high energy content. It's for making energy, but we also know that it's not good for the environment, and you have to bring it here, so it's not local. So I think it's not a fair comparison, but it's what we have to be able to use it. So now we look at we have woody biomass, biology crops, and ag crop residues, and you can see that it varies. The energy content varies. So the energy content is going to vary based on the type of feedstocks, but also how it was harvested, when it was harvested, what was done to it. So these are all the things we have to keep in mind when we're thinking about using a biomass as a feedstock for energy production. Here's some data for some of the biomass that we received from here, from Puerto Rico. So we've got, you can read some of the samples we have here, and you can see that sorghum is on the right side over there, and it's pretty low in energy content, and I will explain why that is. Otherwise, when you look at the wood, they're pretty good. They all have a similar energy content. Why is sorghum so low? This is because, before I go there, I will need to talk about something else. It's the energy content is actually correlated to the carbon content in the material. The more carbon, the higher energy will be. And in biomass, you have three constituents. You have cellulose and lignin. Cellulose is what we use to make paper, right? So you're all familiar with paper. But all of them, all these three components, they are composed of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. So these are the three elements that they have in their structure here. So the more carbon, the better, right? So if I'm going here now and I'm looking at some of this biomass, you can see that, of course, coal has a lot of high amount of carbon, and you can see these are some of the feedstock I picked because in the mainland, US mainland, these are the relevant ones for us, right? But you can see some differences here. Now, if we look at the feedstock in Puerto Rico, you can see again, here's the wood. So 1, 2, 3, 4 bars on the left, they are pretty good and they are around 50% carbon. And when you look at southern, look at the carbon content, it's very low. Right? So that's why we have low energy for southern because it has low carbon content. Why is that? Well, that's when we go into thinking what else is in the biomass. So we said there is cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. The other constituent is what we call ash. So ash is inorganic, so calcium, potassium, magnesium, all these elements, nutrients that the plant do. However, when we harvest the biomass, we can also harvest impurities, so dirt, rocks, and these will be in the ash category. So there is ash that is naturally present in the biomass because the growth took it from the ground, but then there's ash that we introduce as contaminants. And we don't want that. So that's why it is important we are really careful when we harvest the biomass that we don't decrease the quality of the biomass by adding dirt to it. So if I'm showing you the data now from the Puerto Rico biomass sample that we cover some of the data, look at the ash content, it's nearly 65% ash. And this is, I don't think it's inside, I think it's because of the way it was harvested, it had sand to it. And sand, it's ash. So that's what is happening here. But then when you look at the wood, right, nice, very low ash, that's good. So there are two ways that we're going to see ash in the biomass. It's what is naturally present, but it's what we're going to introduce during harvest of the biomass. So here's a little table that shows you what's good, what's bad. I'm not sure if it's showing on the screen on my computer, but if you look at coal, for example, coal has low moisture, high energy content, ash content between 4 to 16%, so that's me, but it's terrible for the environment, right? In terms of CO2 emission, terrible. So that's what you see for coal. When you look at woody biomass and grasses and industrial process waste, you can see that all of them on the bottom, and it should be green. So they are carbon neutral. That means they're very good for the environment, right? But they have some challenges, right? So that's what I just talked about, that the quality of the biomass is important. Right? And so there is a way to improve the quality of the biomass. You can sort it, you can make piles with different ones. That's wood is good, grasses is not as good. So you can sort it. You can sieve it, so you can remove small particle size, for example. Usually they will be the one with the higher ash content. So by removing some of the low particle size, you can decrease your ash content in the biomass. You can wash it. There is a way also to wash it to remove the ash. You can blend very good biomass with something that is not as good, blend them to make them at a level that you are good with, right? And it's what also we call densification. You can make pellets. When you make pellets, you densify it to increase the energy content. All of these things are possible. Of course, it's not cheap, right? Anything we do to the biomass is going to increase the cost. Your biomass can be free, but when you start doing something to it, it's money. But nothing is free, right? We have to, we can't do anything for free. So there are, so that's where you think about what you can do to increase the quality of your biomass, but also not to increase too much the cost of your biomass, then at the end you're negative when you're trying to do it, right? So one really important component is to think about the entire supply chain, right? And what do I mean by that? I mean about collecting the biomass, transporting the biomass, doing something to the entire supply chain. And when we do that, we have to keep in mind the quality of the biomass and the consistency of the biomass are two key components that we target when we think about converting a biomass to a feedstock for a conversion technology. And then the last point I want to make is we have to educate the people who have the biomass that there is value in that biomass. Carbon is money, but you have to be careful, don't add dirt to it, because then you if you're adding dirt. So training of the people about the quality of the biomass, the need to control the consistency of the biomass, I think it's very, very important. So if we can do all these things for Puerto Rico, you will have a diverse energy production system, right? So you will increase your energy security, your independence and resilience. So you will be, in a better shape when there is an emergency situation. You will be using locally renewable supplies, right? That is here, you don't need to import it, it's using here. You can grow it on marginal land, and so that you can increase profit for the growers and the community. And finally, you will reduce greenhouse gas emission and help to combat climate change. So this is really what I had to tell you about. So the point, I guess, is that not all biomasses are good. You have to think about the quality of the biomass, of the biomass, and you have to think about every step along the supply chain. You can have a positive or a negative impact on that biomass quality. So by keeping in mind that the quality is important, then every step to get a very good feedstock for thermochemical conversion. And there's not just one biomass, it's going to be all kind of different biomasses that you will be using. And then it's not just also biomass, right? You have wind, you can do hydrothermal. So I think the solution will be a suite of new energy resources for the island to make it independent and resilient. That's it. Thank you so much. Now again, I'm sorry I couldn't do it in Spanish.
Good morning, everyone. Like Nikki, I'm sorry I can't deliver this in Spanish, and I cannot deliver with the speed at which Joaquin and Christian were talking. I could give it in French, but that I definitely would not be able to match the speed. I was trying to pick up a few words, but it goes so fast that it's not possible. Anyway, my name is Noor Abdul Mumin. I'm an associate professor at the University of Tennessee in the Center for Renewable Carbon and Biosystems Engineering Department. And my area of research is in thermochemical conversion, biomass conversion to fuel, chemicals, and power. And so today what I will talk to you guys about is sort of background about biomass conversion technologies, maybe some ways to think about differences between those biomass conversion technologies, because this is becoming more common, and there are terminologies that are out there, and so knowing them and knowing the benefit, the trade-offs between those different technologies would be helpful. And then I will sort of touch on to our project and sort of our vision for that. So, biomass is perhaps the oldest source of energy, right? As man learned to make fire, this has pretty much been the primary source of energy for Earth. And it is still today, actually, the primary source of energy. Cooking, eating, and lighting, right? And so, urbanization, development and urbanization were all supported by technologies that we're talking about today. But specifically for biomass, it is sort of the foundation of what we started with, and how we kind of got into all of these different technologies that we've used over the years. So fast forward at the beginning of the 20th century, we have really perhaps what has set this to be a technology to even be considered for large production, right? And this is the famous Fischer-Tropsch process, which was developed by two scientists, German scientists, in 1925, 25. The original concept was developed in 23, and then they did the reactor sort of scale up by 25 to demonstrate the feasibility of this. The first sort of implementation of thermochemical conversion for fuel production, right? They did it on coal, but actually the very first concept for the Fischer-Tropsch process were on biomass. And the reason why they switched over from biomass to coal relates to what Dr. LeBay was talking about, the energy content. Right? Coal has a much higher energy content. Energy-wise, energy efficiency-wise, it was much more valuable for Germany to consider coal, and Germany had an abundance of coal resources. Of course, Germany did this because to support the world effort, they had an embargo on oil production, and they had a lot of coal, and they had a lot of technical knowledge, and so that's kind of what the pressure cooker that created this first transformation. I threw this in there because we're talking about distributed power systems, right? And this is perhaps the first version of a distributed power system. This was, again, in Europe, in Germany, around during World War II period, where the process of gasification was implemented and actually added onto vehicles as a way to generate syngas, which then went into the engine directly to produce fuel. Gasoline that we use right now in our tanks is combusted to create the energy in the engine to drive the internal combustion process. Here they're taking the gas product directly into. And this was, due to essentially again the lack of the supply chain and the lack of availability for gasoline during World War II. And so times really these kinds of constraints, ingenuity comes into play, right? Start to think about ways to do that. Our problem. So one of the challenges with this, of course, is and one of the reasons why right now we have liquid fuel power vehicle is the energy density. By energy density, you have about a 10-fold difference by volume of energy density. For a gallon of gasoline compared to a gallon of syngas, you have about a 10-fold difference. It doesn't really make sense in stable condition, but under scenarios, as it was the case for Germany, that did make sense. So this period between the 1940s, after World War II, there's been sort of a dormant stage of development in sort of these thermochemical technologies. And part of the reason this is a period right after 1945 was the oil boom. Discovered oil in the Middle East. Oil was cheaply abundant in the Middle East. And so between that 1945 all the way to the oil embargo period around the 1970s, we had a huge boom of oil production, higher energy containing fuel. And so all of these processes for deriving energy from biomass or coal through thermochemical conversion processes sort of were less energy favorable. Except for one place in the world, that was South Africa. And South Africa at the time had the apartheid regime between 90, and they were subject to embargo. So the only way that they could produce gasoline, diesel, and aviation fuel is to have alternative methods. So they continue working on this process that was first developed in Germany to continue to refine that and to actually essentially meet the gasoline, diesel, and aviation fuel in South Africa at one point. So I sort of bring all of this as a background context, right? Nothing happens in technologies to our needs, to our specific problems. But everything that we're talking about has already been done to some extent at various scales for different purposes, right? So now there's more and more interest in biomass-derived energy fuel and products, and that's kind of coming back to the sustainability concept, right? When you think of coal, coal is essentially organic matter that's been buried underground over millions of years. And as a result of that process, you kind of lost some of the oxygen and you enriched the carbon content, like Dr. LeBear was saying, right? And so coal is actually a way of sequestering carbon. When we start to use coal and oil, we are de-sequestering carbon. And as a result of that, we have this imbalance of carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases that are affecting our climate. And so the interest in biomass, of course, is for us to reverse that trend. Instead of de-sequestering carbon, why not leave that carbon and additionally find some way of generating all of our fuel or energy needs in a sort of neutral way, in a carbon neutral way, right? And so I would say maybe this is sort of that first, the interest came back stronger at the beginning of the 2000s, and it sort of has the phase of it, but there's still interest in that. Perhaps sometimes the application changed and people find niche markets where the economics work better or the argument is stronger, and they sort of focus on that. So biomass conversion processes, right? There are essentially sort of two main ways that we could go about this. So I won't go into the biomass sources because I could have talked about these in some extent, but I'll focus on these different processes, right? There's two ways to go about this. There's the biochemical platform, using biological agents to degrade biomass and produce the intermediate products and upgrade those intermediate products either through biological routes or chemical routes. And then there's a thermochemical conversion platform, and this really comes with these three technologies here: pyrolysis, gasification, and combustion, and I'll come back to those. And then there are hybrid platforms that use integration between biochemical platform and thermochemical platform. Maybe leverage the fact that you have a lot of waste heat in the thermochemical conversion platform processes, and maybe reuse biochemical processes, or maybe in some cases it's much more efficient and more selective to do certain transformations using biological agents than to do them with chemical agents, catalysts, and things like that. Right. And the end goal is always these kind of three products here, but in the case of this project, really, we're focusing on biopower. Right? And the reason is that the biofuel and biochemical products are oftentimes very capital-intensive processes. To go to work making biofuels, or to make biomaterials, biochemicals, bio-derived materials, biochemicals, you start to get into capital investments that are similar to what you see in the petrochemical or in the fine chemical industries. Right? And that's, in those cases, they have plants that last 20 years, 30 years, and they're investing 100 millions or plus. The volume of material they need for that, the volume of intermediate chemicals they need for that is really. makes sort of sense for our project or maybe even for Puerto Rico from a biomass source perspective. Right? But biopower, there's a lot of flexibility in the scale. There's a lot of flexibility in sort of plugging that into different niche feedstocks. So this is a little bit of what I talked about, and so when I say thermochemical conversion processes here, I'm talking about really pyrolysis, gasification, and combustion, and I will just expand a little bit on this. When you think about pyrolysis and gasification technology, is to sort of think about that in the context, in a continuum areas, right? There is oxygen supply to the process, and there's operating process temperature and efficiency. So in pyrolysis, what you have is that you're doing your conversion process of oxygen. You're not using any oxygen so in general, what you have here is that you have an endothermic process. That is that you have to always supply energy to it. Right? But in general also, what that means is that you have a higher efficiency process because none of your carbon has been oxidized to carbon dioxide. None of your hydrogen, or partially, has been oxidized to water. So all the energy content of your carbon and your hydrogen remain in your. In contrast, when you look at this other extreme here, in the combustion zone, we were talking about really excess oxygen. So you're taking every single carbon that you have ideally in your biomass, or every single hydrogen, and converting them to carbon dioxide or water. And in the process, you release a massive heat. And then that heat you take and you use it to drive either steam or gas turbines or internal combustion. Right? So gasification is sort of the in-between place. So you have pyrolysis where you have maximum efficiency, lower temperature, and then you have combustion when you have highest temperature, lowest efficiencies, and then you have somewhere in gasification in between, which is an intermediate efficiency process and an intermediate temperature process, but also an intermediate oxygen supply. So you try to supply. If you supply one here on the stoichiometric equivalent, that means that you supply sufficient oxygen to break down, to turn every carbon and every hydrogen into carbon dioxide, hydrogen, or water. For gasification, you are sort of operating within this shorter range, where you're providing only 20 to 60%. In fact, in practice, much less than 60%. It's generally between 25 to 30% of the oxygen that you need to fully oxidize your carbon, your hydrogen, and your biomass. So you still have some energy left in that product. You haven't completely oxidized everything, so you still have some energy left, and you can do something. The products kind of make a difference here, right? When we talk about pyrolysis, we're talking about this temperature range, 350, 600 degrees Celsius, and we're really talking about these three different products. We have biochar, which is a solid carbon material residue from this process. It's got high carbon content. You can more or less think of it as coal, biomass-derived coal. You have bio oil, which is kind of the target product most of the time when you do pyrolysis. It's 65% of the yield, right? And so you want that bio oil as a kind of a substitute for crude oil. So crude oil, of course, is better than bio oil because it's got less oxygen, it's got less, got some fluidity properties that are better than bio oil, but that's essentially the idea here. So rather than wait millions of years for us to generate crude oil by biological material degrading underground, we're accelerating this process in the order of magnitude of seconds to minutes when you do in most cases. And then you have the gas product that's about 20. Gasification, you get rid of all of your oil products because you're operating at a higher temperature and you also have some oxygen. So everything that you get here is gas, so you get 95% ideally in an optimized scenario, you get 95% of your product in the gas phase, right? And then you get biochar as 5%. Of course, there are variations to this. This is when you are trying to maximize your syngas because you're then using this for something else, for chemical production or for your heat production. So that is, gas is your primary product. But if you want that biochar to be your primary product, you can adjust the operating condition to sort of maximize your yield of biochar. Nonetheless, gas is always going to be the major product in your gasification process because of the thermal. And then the last one is combustion. We don't often think of combustion in sort of this picture, but there's been actually quite a bit of work in biomass combustion or biomass coal blend combustions. This is at higher temperatures, 900 degrees Celsius, and really all you get in this case is gas, mostly gas, 98% of it is gas. And what you get at the end is not biochar, it's slag. And it's basically only the minerals, the ash, that Dr. LeBear was talking about that's left, but it's usually in an oxidized form. So if you have calcium, it'd be calcium carbonate or calcium oxide. If you have magnesium, it'd be magnesium oxide. Because you're in that high oxidative environment, you have large excess of oxygen in the process. So when we look at these, you sort of, there are advantages and disadvantages of these, of course, and that's naturally how people came up with pyrolysis, gasification, and combustion. They did one process and they saw some disadvantages and they did the process to get rid of the disadvantages. So on the advantage side, as I mentioned, you have high efficiency for pyrolysis, right? So this first column here is pyrolysis, this is gasification, and this is combustion. You have liquid intermediate, high efficiency for pyrolysis. It is more sensitive to quality of fuel. So when we think of biomass, as Dr. LeBear was mentioning, we think of biomass quality. If you have biomass with high ash content, gasification, on the other hand, it's got gas intermediate, it's still high energy efficient, especially if you have an integrated gasification combined cycle. That's where you try to really have an integration with the entire on the combustion side, of course, it is excellent for fuel flexibility because you have oxygen. So even if you have those metals, you're oxidizing those metals as you're doing combustion. So you have them in the oxidized form, and they're generally in the oxidized form. It's mature, but it's got low efficiency. Technical challenges, right? So on the bio, when you do pyrolysis, even though it's a high efficiency, the challenge there, technical challenge is you end up with a product with high viscosity and low volatility. Crude oil is generally lower viscosity and high volatility. And that's why distillation columns in the petrochemical industry work well for separating compounds and processing works well. When you take bio oil and you try to upgrade it, what happens is because of its low volatility, you form a large amount of coke. High complexity, high oxygen content, of course, that's not beneficial, and high purity. So when it comes to gasification, some of the challenges that we have, depending on the feedstock, is almost in all cases you have to deal with tar, which are organic compounds that condensate on typically during the process. And then you have minerals. Whatever minerals you have in your material, you tend to have those minerals also in your gas. So you want to be mindful of that during the selection of your feedstock. And when it comes to combustion, it's really managing those minerals carefully, understanding which mineral mixtures you have, and then of course the emissions. So if you have a feedstock that has more nitrogen, more sulfur, you're going to end up with more nitrogen. I'm going to kind of quickly go over this. Actually, I will skip over this and sort of focus on this a little bit because this is gasification. of stationary systems. Some of these that are shown here for gasification and for Bose pyrolysis, to then render those mobile. But the thing that we're striving to do here is really to try to make this a smaller scale footprint mobile system. In most cases that I've been exposed to, some mobile systems can be perhaps sometimes over-engineered in a way that you might end up having less flexibility in sort of scale adjustment. So we're going for the lower end of the scale, which then if you more of a matter of increasing the number of units that you have to achieve that. So now I will stop here, and I think I am almost done with time. And, I think we all will be open to taking questions.
Ya. Ahora tenemos, estamos bien en tiempo, tenemos unos 20 minutos. Esta excelente presentación, así que so type of process and the ones that we have when we burn for power generation.
Yeah, so the ashes that you get from biomass are generally less toxic than the ones that you have from coal. Because most of the time you have the biomass in land that doesn't have amounts of arsenic or some of those toxic metals. The metals that you have in the ash are just the metals that the plant took when it was growing. And so when you convert the plant, you have the contrast for coal, you tend to have really high sulfur content, really high nitrogen content, and you also tend to have more of those toxic metals. So arsenic, lead, some of those are really high in coal, depending on where the coal is harvested.
Entonces, complicaciones en la
Yeah.
I don't know what the question is, but I
And
know.
then that's at the end, so I figured maybe
So maybe you're gonna need a little bit of help. So what I think, let me, yeah. So what I think she's answering. Of sarcasm that they get to our proposal. So she saw a graph, and we have a lot of like she said, a lot of patches. But in contrast, when you have like was lower. But how can we use that sarcasm even though it has a lot of patches? What can when use can we give it to him because it's a problem to us?
Yeah. I think the way you harvest it, the way you get it, will have an impact. I think it's, I'm not an expert in sargassum, okay? I don't think I, apart from the samples you gave me, I don't think I've seen it. But when you collect it, you have to make sure you don't sand with it. And I think that's really the one way to kind of increase the quality of the biomass is by being careful with the way you biomass. And then if there is But I don't know because we haven't done different ways to harvest them, so I'm not sure which part of the ash is naturally present in there and which part came from naturally present there. There are ways to remove it. So we can remove it too. But Dr. Abdullah said that he can use higher ash content biomass. Okay, maybe not 6%, but 20%, 15% should be okay.
Yeah. If iron silica, more like sand, that's probably fine.
Like sieve it or shake it.
So
You can remove.
that's a good point that she has that sample and take out.
So you go to the ocean and you go
Yeah.
in there. You cannot touch the ground. You
Yeah,
have
well,
to
maybe
take
you know I
it.
can wash it before I meal
Yeah,
it and send the sample so we can have understand which part is part of natural part of the biomass and which
And
part.
I assume sodium will be high.
Yeah. Is there another question?
The problem was the I it's not really possible because I mean there's machinery and everything that you get, but then you would have to get it to the
Asking is a process to
el nivel de
Okay.
realizar el proceso de ese podrían hacerlo porque va a ser mucho más difícil
Yeah, like it's dependent because we have both samples then. So we have both samples from different places. One was from
eso
base.
afectaría.
So what we did there, one is both of them are really high, but compared to what we would want to be, like is a good value. But in this case, they're even one. I think one is even higher than 60, and the other. That is because of the how we are collecting that biomass. Yeah, like in Mexico, I'm seeing like because they have the same problem, especially for tourism, it's really bad. So what they do is harvested before it reaches the sand. So when you're gonna have salt, of course, and when it dries, you're gonna have. But maybe it's easier. I don't know. Maybe you can wash it, and there's always a possibility, like Dr. Lave said. But there's always you need to take what is the is economic feasible to do. So I think we
because because I like to talk about trees. A tree is like a identical person, right? Talk a lot about wood and ag biomass because we've done a lot of other example. And we don't have it on my island, by the way. No. So I don't know what it looks like in the real. Tomorrow maybe. But so we have to be careful, right? These are two data points only. So two samples, two data points. So we need to collect all samples under different conditions. That will give an idea about the range of ash that we will have for these kind of items. I just want to make sure. Like I said, 60%, we can't use it. This is just one sample.
And again, we think because of that variability, it's because also because of the collection. So, but there's ways to even pinpoint which is not.
Depende de uno de ese material. Mi pregunta es, cuando más material, la gráfica hacía como que el material con madera, era como el más. Hay madera por ahí en montones, como que quiero. Es posible como generar esa cantidad de material para que no veo que yo no veo aparte de la temporada de huracanes, yo no veo por ahí que hay muchos lugares que se produzca mucha madera, que otra actividad pues podría funcionar para cuando haya ese periodo de desastre, poder pues, proveer para que la energía pues se
Uso directo.
sí.
I'm just gonna translate. Emergencies we usually don't have. Is that the question? I'm not sure. What can you? That's a good question we're answering ourselves to. That's why we're going around the island to see what is available. Picturing an activo, así que la foto de activo. You can see the
Agriculture waste.
You can use agricultural waste, construction waste, waste. These are all biomass that we can use. And I think I mentioned also we can grow dedicated option for Puerto Rico, but we used to have sugar that we could use after all the sugars, the remaining biomass. So
I want to add the information that some of the objectives that we have in the project is basically to do what you're saying. We need to first know what is out there, and then to see how we're going to design, the scale, and what is feasible or not, and what we need to do to make it maybe feasible. Well, the finding is in Puerto Rico we don't have enough. Maybe for a huge, classification plan, but maybe it can work in these scenarios. That is part of and that is one of the main objectives of this project.
Wood. So probably
adding a little bit for that. So I have been in touch with Dr. Escalabella. Some of the things that, and also with William Wood of Planet. So one of the things that we got samples from Puerto Rico hardwoods. So they gave us some samples because some of they're not only generate, wood like wood. I don't like to call it waste, or like a lot of wood that maybe they doesn't do not, and maybe they can even use it for drying, the wood. So that's a you can close the loop in that sense. So thank you for.
Maybe right now it's about 15.
Yeah, it's 15 kilogram per hour.
Okay.
So the way that we're thinking of this is, that's what we're investigating. That's 15 hour, 3-time volume scale from that, and then a 9-time volume scale. Right? This concept could work in different places across the U.S., and maybe not all places need a base scale that. And the smaller base scale is probably what is more appropriate. The concept also when we were putting this together, I think is that the vision is that this is mobile systems. Right? You can stay somewhere until the supply is done, right? And then you could relocate somewhere else. And in doing so, the cost of transporting biomass or feedstock, cost of energy production. So rather than just transporting smaller volumes all over the place and dealing with steeper terrain, you can kind of relocate there. But if that's a business vision concept, right? If a hurricane happens in Texas, the same business can relocate some of those systems once you don't have a need for them in Puerto Rico. Flexibility in scale, and you can sort of to provide that mobile solution, right? Rather than having this one gigantic system that's bolted down, and you don't have a use for it 10 years later, you have this flexible system that you can take anywhere else. For wildfires, for example, in places where they need to clear, in the high season of wildfires, and the Forest Service, when there's wildfires, they try to control and clear strips that will prevent that from continuing. That's a solution for that too. That's a solution for natural. I think really the concept is that you just enable flexibility in the scale. That's the volume that you have. And if you run out of that volume, if it makes sense to bring in other feedstock or look into other local economics are favorable for that, you can go for it. Economics are not favorable for that, well, then you have other markets available because you have mobility within the system to do that.
What he's saying about the strips, like here in Puerto Rico, we have, they clean the below the lines, the power lines. So there is always, in that sense, you are producing always like wood residues, that is similar to what we get after a hurricane, not in that huge quantity, right? But something similar and it's more constant. Yeah.
Happening in one state, and we're going to be test trials. I'm sure we're going to be locations that have wood, and we can show the technology to people, how gas is, and
So I think
have an idea of how much power you can produce out of 50?
Yeah, the target for the base model is 25 kilograms.
think that something key that is the way that people can get benefit this system, as example, let's talk about agriculture or some type of things that process coffee. They have a lot of pulp and a lot of material that can be biomass. So not necessarily they are looking for the highest yield or performance for the equipment. They just want that revenue of what they're going to, in other way, go throw aside and then compost there. That's something good too. But if they can get a revenue, that will be better for the company. So that's something that I have here a lot with agriculture, that that they're trying to get as more profit of their products and their byproducts. So I think that a key is that as more compact and mobile as possible will be, that will be super cool, because they're going to use it and they're going to move it around. Also, if they can connect it to the power grids, I mean, if they can save $200 in a bill, that's $200 in a bill. So that's something that, again, is going to help the environment, but also is going to be a benefit. And when people see the benefits, they start using the things and everything. So I think that's something that is super. I like the idea in terms of that's something that's a problem that we have right now. Also the landfills. That's a super major problem here. We're going to get out without no landfills. So how the landfills can get a benefit from managing better, the wood that they receive, because they're going to be receiving anyways. So why don't take advantage of that? So I think that's the way that it's a good idea that can work, as the people see how they can economically get some benefit back.
Yesterday we went to visit a place, and we talked about that exactly, because I can't remember the number, but the amount, we use only 20% maybe of the, yeah.
So they need more,
Yeah.
20%, I think 80%
Weight,
is the cost.
Yes. So 80% of that is waste. But we were talking about converting it to biochar, for example, and then they can apply it back in their field as a carbon sequester, and then because there will be all these nutrients in there that can.
Then you can use the heat also for roasting.
Yeah, boilers. I mean, those
So-
people use boilers.
If I mean, like that farmer is like, it's what you're saying, no? They're looking for other revenues. So farmer, the company that's making now whatever. So also, but if I had a lot, can I use it, to then maybe the cost of my electricity, or the amount of maybe propane gas that I do to drive the heat, So yeah, here there are a lot of players, and very specific ones. So, but once we know what we have, maybe we can then want that the feedback from it to understand more the ones that we have.
The economical value is really the driver, right? I mean, climate change, yes, it's a big deal, but we have to, right? We need energy tomorrow. So I think if we can do it in a way, short term, long term, it will help the planet. But the goal is a short term. It's really, now when we're in an emergency situation, climate. And when you don't have power, don't have water, who cares about climate change? I worry about at this point. And so I think we have to.
like an answer to una contestación a su pregunta. A nivel contemporáneo.
She's saying that in Salinas, college grant helps a lot of people to do some things you want to compost and return to the soil. So, and the grant is open, and I've told it that if somebody wants help, not exactly writing the grant, but or the proposal, but getting ideas for energies to get that fund. Bodies are so some organic matters are good for some things. So a lot of things that you eat that have a lot of nitrogen in it, you might not want to cancel that, and you need to treat them. Composting or ferment. You have to choose which ones are part of what we're doing. What you're getting.
At the end goes back to what we did. Or maybe for fermentations are different from the depends what you have.
But we need to do taking energy from it and getting biochar or
And also when you gasify at the end, you're gonna have can use those ashes came from the earth, right? So we can also again use it to replenish the soil.
well, I just want to mention something that I went back. This one was really a hard one for me to write, and they are excellent in that every month. They write a proposal every month, but so they're excellent people to write. I couldn't have done it. I mean, I submitted it, but really, we were, they're very